Imagine for a moment that someone speaks to you in a way that cuts, in a way that makes you feel dismissed, or even in a way that feels outright disrespectful. Now, the instant human reaction, the one that comes before we even think, is to flare up, to defend ourselves, to push back. That's the ego saying, I won't let you get away with this. And while that may feel powerful in the moment, it's actually a trap, because the second we lose control of our emotions, we've handed over the very thing that gives us strength. Masculinity, in its truest form, is not about domination. It's not about raising your voice or flexing your anger. It's about composure. It's about the ability to stay calm when everything in you is tempted to explode. Think about the man who shouts back, who gets red in the face, who hurls insults the second he feels slighted. Does he look powerful, or does he look rattled? More often than not, he looks like he's lost himself. The masculine man knows that the moment he becomes reactive, he's given away control, not just of the situation, but of himself. And nothing undermines authority, confidence, or attraction faster than showing that someone else can pull your strings with a few words. When a woman disrespects you, the easy route is to mirror it. If she's sharp, you get sharper. If she's dismissive, you get louder. If she mocks you, you bite back. But here's the truth that's not strength. That's insecurity in disguise. Real strength is the ability to pause, breathe, and choose a response rather than be led by a reaction. That pause, that calmness, is what separates the man who is in charge of his world from the man who is tossed around by it. And let me be clear, calmness doesn't mean passivity. It doesn't mean you just sit there and take disrespect. It means you decide how to address it on your terms, not on hers. There's a huge difference between being a man who loses his cool because he feels attacked, and being a man who notices the disrespect, stays composed, and then chooses whether it's worth addressing, ignoring, or walking away from altogether. That choice only belongs to the one who keeps his self-control. When you stay calm, something powerful happens. You change the energy of the entire interaction. Instead of meeting fire with fire, you extinguish it with composure. And in that moment, you stand out. Because, let's be honest, most people can't do it. Most people are prisoners to their emotions. When they're disrespected, they lash out. When they're triggered, they go off. But the masculine man operates differently. His calmness becomes the mirror that reveals the other person's behavior for what it is. If she's being unreasonable, it becomes obvious, not because you yelled louder, but because your calmness makes her chaos visible. And it's in that calmness that respect is often regained. People may not admit it in the moment, but when they realize they couldn't rattle you, that their words didn't push you off balance, that you stood there grounded and composed, they feel it. That's power. Not the loud, aggressive kind of power, but the quiet strength that earns admiration. I'll give you an example. Imagine a woman makes a cutting remark in public, trying to embarrass you. Now, most men in that moment feel the need to defend themselves immediately, to prove they won't be walked on. But the masculine man, instead of snapping back, smiles slightly, maybe pauses, and responds in a way that shows he's unfazed. He might even let it slide entirely. Why? Because he knows his value isn't dictated by one comment. He knows his worth isn't up for debate. And in that calmness, he communicates something far more powerful than words ever could. You don't get to control me. This is why self-control is the foundation for handling disrespect. Without it, every other tool, setting boundaries, using logic, even walking away, falls apart. Because if you can't master yourself, you can't master the situation. The disrespect may sting, but your response is what defines you. The masculine man refuses to let someone else's poor behavior turn him into someone he doesn't respect. And here's the part that really matters: the respect you gain from others begins with the respect you have for yourself. If you respect yourself, you won't let disrespect drag you down into ugliness. You won't let it push you into reactions you regret. You'll remain calm, not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to choose restraint. So, when faced with disrespect, remember this: your composure is not silence, it's not surrender, it's not avoidance. It's strength. It's a declaration that your peace is more valuable than a petty argument. And when you show that level of calmness, people take notice. You set the tone, you set the standard, and that is the mark of a truly masculine man. Because the man who cannot be shaken is the man who commands respect. Or one of the most important things a masculine man understands when it comes to disrespect is that calmness alone isn't enough. It's the foundation, yes, but it's not the whole picture. Because if all you ever did was stay calm without ever making your standards known, people would never know where the line is. That's why a man has to be able to set clear boundaries. Boundaries that aren't fueled by hostility or aggression, but by self-respect. Now, let's talk about what a boundary really is. Too often, people confuse it with control. They think setting a boundary means telling someone else what they can or can't do. But that's not it at all. A boundary isn't about controlling another person. It's about clarifying what you will and won't allow in your own life. It's about saying, this is where I stand. This is how I expect to be treated. And if you can't respect that, then I'll make the decision that protects my peace. That distinction is so important because the second you make it about controlling the other person, you've already lost. The masculine man doesn't need to control. He doesn't need to shout, to slam doors, or to throw ultimatums around like confetti. He simply makes it clear, through his words, his actions, and his consistency, that certain behaviors are unacceptable. And here's the key: he enforces it without hostility. When you think of hostility, think of defensiveness, think of rage, think of bitterness. All of those come from fear, fear of being walked on, fear of being seen as weak. But a man who knows his worth doesn't need to defend it loudly. He simply stands in it. So when disrespect happens, he doesn't make a scene, he communicates directly. He doesn't say, "You always do this, you never respect me, you're impossible." That's hostility disguised as self-expression. Instead, he says something clear and grounded, like, "That kind of comment doesn't work for me," or "I'm not going to engage if the conversation goes in that direction." Notice the difference. One approach escalates. The other approach sets a boundary without dragging both people into the mud. The first makes it about ego. The second makes it about standards. And here's the thing: people respect standards, even if they don't like them. They may not admit it in the moment, but deep down, they recognize when someone is confident enough to enforce what they will and won't tolerate. Setting boundaries without hostility is also deeply tied to consistency, because a boundary that isn't enforced is just a wish. If you say, "I won't tolerate being spoken to like that," but every time it happens you let it slide, you've taught the other person that your words don't carry weight. The masculine man doesn't need to repeat himself endlessly. He shows, through his follow-through, that his boundaries mean something. Sometimes that means ending a conversation. Sometimes it means walking away for the evening. Sometimes, if the behavior is constant and unchanging, it means removing himself from the relationship entirely. But the decision always comes from strength, not spite. And there's another layer here that often goes overlooked. Boundaries aren't just about protecting yourself from disrespect. They're about modeling how respect should look. When you calmly and clearly set a boundary, you're not only protecting your own dignity, you're also teaching the other person what kind of interaction is healthy, what kind of dynamic is worth building. You show them, by example, that strength and kindness aren't opposites, that you can be firm without being cruel, and that respect isn't negotiable. Now, some people will test you. They'll push against your boundaries to see if they're real. That's human nature. And when that happens, the masculine man doesn't buckle. He doesn't backtrack out of fear of losing the person. He knows that keeping someone who disrespects him by sacrificing his own standards is not a win. It's a loss. Because if you give up your boundaries to keep someone, you've already given up the very thing that makes you strong. But let's be honest, sometimes setting a boundary will make people uncomfortable. Sometimes it will create friction, and that's okay. Discomfort isn't the enemy, disrespect is. And if someone truly values you, they'll adjust. If they don't, then you have your answer. Either way, standing firm in your boundaries saves you time, energy, and self-respect. So picture this: a woman raises her voice, mocks you in front of others, or makes a cutting remark. Instead of snapping back, instead of laughing it off nervously, instead of pretending it didn't happen, you calmly and clearly let her know, "That's not okay with me." You don't have to shout. You don't have to match her tone. You don't have to give a long speech, just a clear line in the sand. And then, here's the important part: you follow through. If she continues, you disengage. You don't give the behavior more energy than it deserves. That action, more than anything you could say, sends the message that you live by your standards. Boundaries without hostility are a reflection of a man's inner security. They say, "I don't need to raise my voice to be heard. I don't need to attack to defend myself. I know my worth, and I live by it." And when you carry yourself that way, not only do you handle disrespect with strength, but you also elevate every relationship you're in, because people know exactly where they stand with you. Because in the end, respect isn't demanded. It's commanded by the standards you uphold. When it comes to dealing with disrespect, there's a deeper truth that goes beyond staying calm and setting boundaries. And that truth is this: a man cannot expect respect from anyone else if he doesn't first respect himself. Everything begins there. You see, disrespect stings most when it hits a place inside of us that's already unsure, already questioning its own worth. That's why two different men can experience the same situation and respond in completely different ways. One feels crushed, his confidence shattered, while the other shrugs it off and carries on. The difference isn't what was said. It's the foundation each man is standing on. If your self-worth depends on the validation of others, then every negative word becomes a threat. Every time someone dismisses you, it feels like confirmation of the doubts you already carry. And when that happens, you'll either lash out in anger or shrink back in silence, neither of which is a position of strength. But when you've built respect for yourself, when you truly believe in your value, disrespect doesn't have the same power. It doesn't define you, it doesn't shake you, it doesn't make you question who you are. It just becomes noise. Now, self-respect isn't something you can fake. It's not about puffing your chest out or acting like you don't care. Real self-respect is lived. It's in the standards you hold for yourself every single day. Do you take care of your body, your mind, your ambitions? Do you keep your word to yourself? Do you honor your commitments? Because here's the reality: people watch how you treat yourself. If you don't take yourself seriously, they won't either. If you don't prioritize your own well-being, they'll assume they don't need to either. Respect isn't just something you demand, it's something you broadcast through your daily choices. And let's talk about relationships for a moment. When a man doesn't respect himself, he often clings to relationships that chip away at him. He tolerates poor treatment, thinking that enduring it will somehow prove his strength or earn him love. But the opposite is true. The more you accept disrespect, the more you teach others that it's allowed. And the longer you stay in that cycle, the more you erode your own sense of worth. A masculine man recognizes this. He knows that staying where respect doesn't exist isn't loyalty, it's self-betrayal. Self-respect also shows up in the way you communicate. When you value yourself, you don't need to explain or justify your worth to anyone. You don't beg someone to see your value. You live it. You show it through your calmness, your standards, and your refusal to allow disrespect to dictate your behavior. And here's the beautiful part: when you live that way, the right people naturally step up. They rise to meet you at that level of respect because your example inspires them to do so. The wrong people, they'll fall away. And that's not a loss. It's a gain, because you've cleared space for relationships that actually nurture you. Think about how powerful that is. A man who respects himself doesn't need to win every argument. He doesn't need to force someone to treat him well. He simply holds himself to a higher standard, and in doing so, filters out the people who aren't capable of meeting him there. That's not arrogance. That's wisdom. It's knowing that respect is not a gift someone else hands you. It's the reflection of how you already see yourself. Now, let's be real. Self-respect isn't about never feeling hurt. Disrespect will still sting sometimes. It's human. But the difference is in how quickly you recover. The man who respects himself doesn't spiral. He doesn't carry those words with him for days or weeks, replaying them in his mind. He reminds himself, this doesn't define me. I know who I am, I know what I bring, and I don't need their approval to validate that. That's the voice of self-respect, and when you carry that voice inside, no one else's disrespect can drown it out. And there's another layer here. When you respect yourself, you actually treat others with more respect too. Because you're not operating from insecurity, you don't need to put people down to feel strong. You don't need to prove yourself by dominating others. Your strength is quiet, steady, assured. And ironically, that's what makes people respect you even more. So, when a woman is disrespectful, the masculine man doesn't internalize it as proof of his inadequacy. He doesn't ask himself, am I not enough? He doesn't bend over backward trying to earn her approval. He stands in the respect he already has for himself. And from that place, he decides how to move forward. Does he address it? Does he walk away? Does he disengage? Whatever the choice, it comes from a place of grounded confidence, not desperation. Because at the end of the day, people can only treat you as poorly as you treat yourself. And if you want the world to respect you, it starts with you showing them how it's done. When a man is disrespected, the temptation is almost always emotional. The sting of someone dismissing you, mocking you, or raising their voice cuts right past logic and lands in the gut. And when you react from that gut feeling alone, it usually doesn't end well. You either fire back, which escalates the tension, or you shut down, which leaves you feeling powerless. Neither of those responses communicates strength. That's why the masculine man makes a different choice. He leans into logic instead of being swept away by emotion. Logic doesn't mean coldness. It doesn't mean ignoring what you feel. It means you acknowledge the emotion, but you don't let it take the wheel. Think of it like this: emotions are passengers, in the car. They're allowed to ride along, but they don't get to grab the steering wheel. Logic is what decides the direction, and that's what keeps you in control. Now, let's take an example. A woman makes a sarcastic remark in front of others that was clearly meant to embarrass you. The emotional reaction is to snap back, to prove to the room that you won't be disrespected. But what does that really achieve? In most cases, it just lowers you to the same level and confirms to everyone watching that you can be baited. The logical approach, on the other hand, steps back and asks, what outcome do I actually want here? If the outcome is to maintain your dignity, show that you can't be rattled and set the tone for how you expect to be treated, then lashing out won't get you there. A calm, measured response, or even the decision not to engage at all, often carries far more weight. That's what logic does. It zooms out. It helps you see that every situation is bigger than just the sting of the moment. Because disrespect isn't just about the words spoken, it's about the power dynamic you create in your response. If you explode, you hand over control. If you shut down, you surrender it. But if you pause and think logically, you keep the upper hand. This doesn't mean you suppress how you feel. It means you channel it. A masculine man might feel hurt or angry in the moment, but he doesn't let those feelings define his choices. Instead, he uses logic to decide, is this worth addressing now? Or is it better to wait? Is this a pattern that needs a serious boundary, or is it a one-off comment that doesn't deserve my energy? By approaching disrespect with reason, he prevents small sparks from turning into wildfires. And here's something crucial. Logic also protects you from misinterpreting situations. Sometimes what feels like disrespect is really frustration, stress, or poor communication on the other person's part. If you jump straight into emotional reactivity, you might turn a misunderstanding into a fight. But when you slow down and let logic guide you, you can separate what was actually meant from what you felt. That ability to interpret, instead of just react, is what keeps relationships from spiraling. It also builds trust. People feel safer around someone who doesn't lose control every time tension rises. They respect the man who can take a breath, think it through, and respond in a way that actually moves the conversation forward. And ironically, when you're logical in the face of disrespect, you end up being the one who sets the emotional tone for everyone else. Your calm reasoning forces the other person to either rise to that level or be exposed by the contrast. There's also a deeper strength in choosing logic because it keeps you aligned with your values. If you know you're the kind of man who wants to lead with respect, who wants to handle conflict without aggression, then acting purely on emotion can pull you out of alignment with yourself. Logic brings you back. It reminds you of who you are and how you want to show up. And that self-consistency is powerful. It means you don't regret your reactions later because you acted with intention, not impulse. Think about it like this: if someone throws fire at you, your emotions want to throw fire back. But logic asks, do I want to live in ashes, or do I want to keep building something strong? Choosing logic is about protecting what matters most in the long run: your dignity, your relationships, your peace of mind. That doesn't mean you never confront disrespect. It means you confront it in a way that's strategic, measured, and effective. And sometimes, logic tells you that silence is stronger than words. That walking away speaks louder than any clever comeback ever could. Other times, it tells you a calm but direct response is needed to draw the line. But whatever the decision, it comes from a place of thoughtfulness, not impulse. And that is what makes it powerful. Because at the end of the day, it's not the man who feels nothing who is strong. It's the man who feels everything and still chooses reason over reaction. One of the hardest things for a man to do in the face of disrespect is to walk away. It feels counterintuitive. We're conditioned to think that strength means standing your ground, arguing your point, proving yourself right. The ego whispers, if you walk away, you've lost. But the truth is often the opposite. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in fighting back. It's in knowing when the fight isn't worth your time, your peace, or your energy. Walking away doesn't mean weakness. It doesn't mean surrender. It doesn't mean that you've been defeated. What it means is that you're choosing where to invest your energy. It's recognizing that not every argument deserves a response and not every battle is worth winning. In fact, sometimes winning looks like leaving with your dignity intact while the other person is left with nothing but their own noise. There's something deeply powerful about a man who can decide in the heat of disrespect, this isn't where I place my energy. Most people can't do that. Most people are controlled by the need to prove something in the moment. But think about it. What does it really prove? If someone is committed to misunderstanding you, to belittling you, to pushing your buttons, then your words won't change them. All your arguing will only confirm to them that they can pull you into the chaos. But the man who calmly disengages shows something far more important, that his self-worth doesn't hinge on convincing someone else to see it. Walking away is also about priorities. You only have so much mental and emotional energy in a day. If you spend it all wrestling with someone's disrespect, what's left for your goals, your relationships, your peace of mind? A masculine man recognizes that his energy is his most valuable resource. He guards it carefully. He invests it in things that grow him, not in things that drain him. And when someone continues to show disrespect despite his calmness, his boundaries, and his logic, he knows that the smartest move is not to keep pushing, it's to step back. Now, walking away doesn't always mean leaving the relationship entirely, though sometimes it does. It can also mean choosing to leave the conversation in the moment. Maybe she raises her voice, throws insults, or tries to bait you. Instead of matching her, you calmly say, "I'm not continuing this right now." And you remove yourself from the situation. That isn't avoidance, it's strength. It's the ability to recognize that nothing productive will come from engaging in that state. And by doing that, you shift the power dynamic. You show that you can't be pulled into a pointless tug of war. But let's be honest, sometimes walking away is the bigger decision. Sometimes it means recognizing that a pattern of disrespect isn't going to change, and no amount of calmness, boundaries, or logic will transform it. And in those moments, the masculine man has the courage to walk away from the relationship altogether. That's not a decision made lightly, but it's a decision rooted in self-respect, because he knows that staying in a place where he's constantly diminished isn't loyalty, it's self-abandonment. And here's the thing, walking away doesn't just protect you, it communicates something profound. It sends the message that you are not desperate, you are not trapped, and you are not willing to sacrifice your peace to hold on to someone else's chaos. People notice that. Even if they don't admit it, they feel it. The man who can walk away is the man who can't be controlled. That is why walking away is so powerful. It's an unspoken declaration of independence. Of course, walking away takes discipline. The ego hates it. The ego wants to win, to prove, to dominate. It wants the last word. But the masculine man operates above ego. He asks, what actually serves me here? What's aligned with my dignity? What will I be proud of tomorrow? And often, the answer isn't in throwing more words into the fire. It's in stepping back and choosing peace over pride. And make no mistake, walking away doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care too much about yourself, your growth, and your future to get stuck in cycles that go nowhere. It means you're strong enough to detach when necessary, and that's a rare strength because it requires the courage to leave without needing applause, without needing to be understood, and without needing to prove a point. Because in the end, the ability to walk away is one of the clearest signs of true strength. It shows you don't just handle disrespect, you rise above it. When we talk about masculinity and strength, it's easy to focus only on the defensive moves, staying calm, setting boundaries, walking away. But there's another layer to it that's just as important, and it's not about reacting at all. It's about leading by example. Because at the end of the day, people don't just respond to what you say, they respond to who you are. Think about it. If a man demands respect but doesn't live in a way that commands it, his words are empty. You can't tell someone to respect you while showing no respect for yourself or others. True influence doesn't come from force, it comes from example. That's why the masculine man doesn't just handle disrespect in isolated moments. He lives every day in a way that sets the standard for how people engage with him. Leading by example begins in the smallest details. The way you speak to others, even in frustration. The way you carry yourself in public. The way you keep your word or fail to. All of those things tell the world how seriously they should take you. If you are calm under pressure, people notice. If you consistently hold yourself to high standards, people notice. And when disrespect does come your way, your character is already speaking louder than any response you could give. There's also something magnetic about a man who embodies the qualities he wants from others. If he wants respect, he gives respect. If he wants maturity, he shows maturity. If he wants calmness, he lives calmness. That doesn't mean he tolerates everything, quite the opposite. It means his very presence sets a tone. When people are around him, they instinctively rise to that tone because he doesn't waver from it. And let's be honest, in relationships, this matters even more. A woman might test your composure, she might push your boundaries, she might see how much she can get away with. But if you consistently lead with strength, respect, and self-control, you set the rhythm of the relationship. You show, without ever lecturing, this is the level we operate on here. And often, that example changes how she shows up too. It pulls the dynamic upward instead of letting it spiral downward. Now, here's what's interesting. Leading by example isn't about perfection. You don't have to be flawless. What people respect is not flawlessness, but consistency. They respect a man who owns his mistakes, who apologizes when he's wrong, who makes adjustments instead of excuses. That, too, is part of leading by example. Because you're showing that strength isn't about never falling. It's about always standing back up with integrity. And leading by example has a ripple effect. When a masculine man handles disrespect with composure, sets boundaries without hostility, respects himself first, and chooses logic over emotion, he doesn't just protect his own dignity. He inspires the people around him. Other men see it and think, that's how I want to handle myself. Women see it and think, that's the kind of man I can trust and respect. It creates an energy that elevates every interaction. There's also an undeniable attraction in this. Because leadership, in its truest form, is deeply compelling. It's not leadership through control, but leadership through presence. When you consistently demonstrate calmness, respect, and strength, people naturally gravitate toward you. They feel safer around you. They feel inspired by you. They feel pulled into your frame instead of dragging you into theirs. That's the quiet kind of leadership that doesn't need to be announced, because it's already felt. And remember, leading by example isn't just for others, it's for yourself too. When you hold yourself to a higher standard, when you commit to being the man who stays calm, who sets boundaries, who respects himself, who chooses logic, who can walk away, you're building a version of yourself that you're proud of. That's not just about earning respect from others, it's about earning respect from yourself. And when you respect yourself at that level, everything else flows more easily. So when you find yourself in a situation with a disrespectful woman, don't just think about how to handle that single moment. Think about the bigger picture. Think about the example you're setting, not just for her, but for yourself, for the people watching, and for the life you're building. Because people might forget the exact words you used, but they won't forget how you carried yourself. They won't forget the energy you brought into the room. They won't forget the standard you upheld. Because in the end, the greatest power a masculine man has isn't just in how he responds. It's in how he leads by the example of who he is.